Is that my daddy? Is that my daddy?
Is that my daddy? Nari asked, pointing at Kang Min-jae while masked rifles closed around her. The ruthless boss dropped to his knees, opened his empty hands, and placed his body between the child and every gun. Subscribe right now and comment your wildest theory below. Who is actually Nari's real father? Or are they hiding a far more dangerous secret? Rain polished the black gates of the Kang estate until they looked cut from a single piece of night. Amara Okafor stood beneath them with one suitcase, one sleeping child, and a silver employment card that had arrived at her apartment without a return address. Seoul glowed below the hill in cold ribbons. Behind her, a sedan that had followed from the daycare slowed at the corner, waited, then rolled away when the cameras above the gate turned toward it. That was why she pressed the card to the reader. The iron opened without a sound. 4-year-old Nari stirred against her shoulder, one small hand locked around the coral bead bracelet Amara had worn since leaving Enugu. The bracelet had belonged to her mother. It was not expensive, but every woman in Amara's family understood what it meant. A daughter could cross an ocean. She could change her work, her language, and the name printed on her residence permit. She did not cross into another family empty-handed. Amara crossed the threshold carrying the only truth that could bring the entire estate down. The house rose from a grove of red pines, all dark stone, glass, and disciplined light. It did not resemble the loud mansions she had seen in Lagos, where wealth announced itself through gates plated in gold and generators that rumbled through the heat. This wealth whispered. A row of shoes stood perfectly aligned inside the entrance. White orchids faced the same direction. Men in charcoal suits moved through the corridors with the silence of hospital orderlies, except for the weight beneath their jackets and the way their eyes found every window before they found a face. The head housekeeper, Sun-hee, met Amara beneath a bronze moon jar. She was 60, narrow as a calligraphy stroke, with iron-gray hair pinned at the nape. Her gaze moved first to Nari, then to the coral beads, then to the faint crescent scar beneath Amara's left thumb. For one suspended second, the older woman's fingers stopped on the household ledger. She knew something. Instead of asking, Sun-hee placed a pair of child-sized slippers beside Nari's feet. Yellow ducks had been stitched across the toes. The gesture was too prepared for an estate that officially employed no one with a child. Amara lowered Nari and watched her step into them. They fit exactly. The employment agency had promised a private room, school transport, and double the normal wage. It had not explained why the Kang household knew Nari's shoe size. Sun-hee led them through the service wing. Amara counted cameras, doors, and turns. She had learned to count exits in the 5 years since one night had divided her life into before and after. The laundry room had 2 windows. The pantry had none. The staff corridor opened toward the garage and the lower garden. At the end waited a small apartment with warmed floors, a low bed, and a child's desk already stocked with crayons. On the desk sat a wooden tiger. Nari reached for it. Amara caught her wrist before her fingers touched the carved stripes. 5 years earlier, the same tiger had hung from a black cord around the neck of a man who had not given her his real name. Sun-hee watched Amara return the toy to the exact center of the desk. The older woman's face remained still, but she removed the household ledger from beneath her arm and placed it inside a locked cabinet before leaving. The key shook once against the brass. By sunrise, Amara understood the rules of the estate. No staff member entered the western study. No one used the main staircase after midnight. Meals for the master were left beneath a warming cover, even when he was away. The ancestral room remained closed, except on appointed days. Nari could use the lower garden, but never the pine path beyond the stone lanterns. The rules were delivered on printed cards, not through conversation, which suited Amara. Silence had kept her daughter alive longer than trust ever had. She hid Nari's birth certificate inside the lining of the suitcase. Then she tucked the wooden tiger beneath folded uniforms where the child could not find it. At 7 that evening, a convoy entered the grounds. Every worker in the kitchen straightened before the engines stopped. Sun-hee removed her apron, smoothed the front of her black dress, and stood with both hands folded. The youngest footman lowered his eyes. Even the security men became more careful with their breathing. Kang Min-jae walked through the rain without an umbrella. He was 37 now, broader through the shoulders than the man Amara remembered, his face sharpened by years that had spared nothing soft. After his father died and his elder brother vanished, he became head of the Hanul Circle. Newspapers called him a logistics chairman. At the docks, men lowered their voices around his name. Amara knew none of those titles 5 years earlier. She had known only the exhausted stranger on a hotel balcony, the man with blood on one cuff and a wooden tiger against his chest, who had watched Lagos lightning split the Atlantic sky as if it were showing him a road out. Now he stopped in the entrance hall. Nari had escaped the service corridor carrying a paper sun. She stood in the center of the polished floor, her curls tied into 2 uneven puffs, yellow slippers bright beneath her green dress. Every adult froze. Min-jae looked down at the child blocking his path. Nari looked up without fear and held out the drawing. Amara reached her in 6 steps, bowed too quickly, and drew her back. Min-jae's gaze passed over the maid's uniform, reached Amara's face, and stayed there. The years between Lagos and Seoul collapsed without mercy. He did not touch her. He did not reveal recognition to the men behind him. Only his right hand changed. The fingers that had been relaxed beside his coat curled once, then closed over the black onyx ring on his smallest finger. During their one night together, that hand had carried no ring. It had carried a crescent cut at the base of the thumb, a wound Amara had bandaged with the edge of her scarf. Nari had been born with a pale crescent beneath the same thumb. Min-jae stepped aside. Amara led her daughter away, feeling his attention between her shoulder blades until the service door shut. That night, someone searched their room. Nothing obvious was taken. The suitcase remained locked. The birth certificate stayed inside its lining. Yet the wooden tiger had been removed from beneath the uniforms and returned to Nari's desk. Its head now faced the western wing. Amara turned it toward the wall. The next morning began with seaweed soup. It was Min-jae's birthday, though no banner marked it. In the kitchen, Sun-hee rinsed wakame while a cook sliced beef into precise strips. The ritual belonged to mothers, to the first food Korean women ate after childbirth, and the bowl children received each year in remembrance of that labor. No mother sat at Min-jae's table. Madame Kang Hae-suk lived in the Eastern Pavilion and had not shared breakfast with her son since his brother vanished. Amara carried the tray to the dining room. She placed the soup before an empty chair and noticed a second bowl cooling across from it. Min-jae entered alone, removed his coat, and sat without looking at the food. On the wall behind him hung a family portrait. His father stood in the center. Hae-suk sat beside him in pearl gray hanbok. 2 sons stood behind them. The older boy wore a wooden tiger around his neck. The younger boy, Min-jae, wore nothing. The tiger had not belonged to him. Amara's hand tightened around the tray. Min-jae saw it. His eyes moved from her face to the portrait, then to the untouched second bowl. He pushed that bowl toward the edge of the table, not toward her, but near enough for its steam to reach her hands. It was a breach of rank, small and unmistakable. Staff did not eat at the family table. A maid did not share the food that honored the labor of a Korean mother. Amara should have retreated. Instead, she took the bowl back to the kitchen and set it beside Nari, who loved the slippery seaweed and ate with complete concentration. When Sun-hee saw which porcelain bowl the child was using, the ladle slipped from her hand. By noon, the estate had begun watching Nari. The attention was never direct. A guard lingered near the lower garden when she played. The driver checked the underside of her daycare van twice. Sun-hee began collecting strands from Nari's hairbrush, then burned them in the kitchen stove before Amara could stop her. Each act could have meant protection or threat. In the Kang house, the 2 often wore the same face. Amara changed Nari's route through the estate each day. She packed lunch in a stainless container, mixing rice with spinach, fried plantain, and mild gochujang, until the colors formed bright circles. She braided the child's hair at dawn, while old Igbo highlife played softly from her phone. Nari hummed the melodies with Korean nursery songs and switched rhythms without noticing. To her, the world had never been divided. Min-jae began appearing in the lower garden at 7 each morning. At first, he crossed it on the way to the garage. Then his route slowed. Nari arranged smooth stones along the edge of the pond, assigning each one a place in an imaginary family. One morning, she left the largest stone alone beneath a pine root. Min-jae paused, moved it beside the smallest stone, and continued toward his car. The next day, Nari moved it back. On the third morning, he crouched and placed a bridge of twigs between them. Amara watched from the veranda with a basket of folded sheets. No smile passed between man and child. No invitation was given. Yet the bridge remained after the rain, protected beneath an overturned glass bowl that had come from the master's private dining room. That evening, Min-jae's men brought a bleeding accountant through the garage. The injury was hidden beneath a coat, but fear reached the corridor before the men did. Amara pulled Nari into the linen room and covered her ears as heavy footsteps moved toward the western study. A ledger had vanished from Min-jae Logistics. 3 port routes, 7 shell companies, and the names of public officials were said to be inside it. Whoever possessed those pages could remove Min-jae from the legitimate world and the criminal one at the same time. An hour later, the accountant left without his company pin. 2 guards carried a sealed box after him. Min-jae emerged last, calm enough to be frightening. He noticed Amara's hand over the linen room handle. His gaze lowered to the line of light beneath the door, where 2 little yellow slippers waited behind her. He turned and ordered the entire corridor cleared with one motion of his fingers. Amara had seen powerful men perform gentleness when an audience could reward them. Min-jae's protection happened when no one was meant to see it. That made it more dangerous. Near midnight, Nari developed a fever. Her breathing tightened with the familiar whistle that followed cold rain and dust. Amara reached for the inhaler and found the canister empty, though it had been half full that morning. The backup was gone. A wet footprint marked the floor beside the medicine cabinet. Someone had entered again. Amara wrapped Nari in a blanket and ran for the service exit. Before she reached it, the estate lights failed. Red emergency strips appeared along the floor. Security doors sealed in sequence, each one closing closer to the room where she stood. Through the glass at the end of the corridor, a shape moved between the pines. Min-jae arrived from the dark with his coat open and a compact pistol low against his thigh. Amara recoiled from the weapon. He saw the child gasping in her arms and placed it on the floor at once. Then he removed his onyx ring, dropped it beside the gun, and approached with empty hands. He took Nari only when Amara's arms gave way. The ruthless man carried the child against his chest, as if her weight had rearranged the bones beneath his suit. He moved through the locked estate while guards opened doors ahead of him. At the garage, he ignored the armored sedan and chose a plain family van, its rear seat already fitted with a child restraint. Another prepared object. Sun-hee sat in front, with the missing inhaler sealed inside an evidence bag. Someone had drained it and returned it to the cabinet. The housekeeper's face held no surprise, only confirmation. Min-jae drove himself. Traffic bent around the black van as escort cars blocked intersections. In the back, Amara held the mask over Nari's face while Min-jae watched through the mirror. Every shallow breath pulled something tighter across his features. At the private clinic, he carried her through the doors and kept one hand beneath her bare feet so the winter air could not touch them. The pediatrician drew blood. A nurse left the labeled vial on a metal tray. Min-jae stood 3 steps away, close enough to take it and powerful enough to command any result. Amara moved between him and the vial. The room changed. His security chief, Park Dae-hyun, shifted near the door. Sun-hee lowered her eyes. Min-jae studied Amara's stance, the blanket clutched around her shoulders, and the terror she could no longer disguise. He could have moved her with one hand. Instead, he stepped back. Then he removed his own cufflink, pressed its pin into his thumb, and let a dark bead fall onto a clean slide. He placed the slide beside Nari's sample, not touching either one. The offer was clear. The choice would remain hers. Amara swept both samples into a kidney dish and poured disinfectant over them. Min-jae's jaw tightened. Still, he did not stop her. The clinic stabilized Nari before dawn. When they returned, the lower garden was filled with men searching the soil beneath the Stone family. The glass bowl had been broken. Under the largest stone, security found a listening device wrapped in black tape. It had been planted before Amara arrived. Min-jae looked toward the child's window. For the first time, suspicion did not point from him to Amara. It pointed past both of them, toward someone who had known exactly where Nari would play. On her pillow, Amara found a photograph taken outside the clinic where Nari had been born. The image showed Amara leaving through a rear door with a newborn against her chest. A red circle had been drawn around the baby's hand. Below it lay the wooden tiger, split neatly down the middle. Inside the hollow carving was a key no one in the Kang family was supposed to know existed. The key was old brass, darkened at the teeth, with a blue enamel crane stamped into its bow. Min-jae recognized it before he touched it. His face did not change, but every guard in the room stepped farther from him. 5 years earlier, his brother Jun-seok had carried a matching crane on the chain of his watch. 3 weeks after a business trip to Lagos, Jun-seok's car had been found beside the Han River, with the driver's door open and no body inside. The family declared him dead after a year. Min-jae never did. The tiger had disappeared on the same trip. Security sealed the estate. Phones went into silver bags. Staff stood in 2 rows beneath the entrance chandelier while Dae-hyun checked access logs. Amara remained near the service door with Nari against her leg. The child held the 2 halves of the broken tiger and tried to press them together. Each failed attempt made Min-jae's eyes harder. Sun-hee carried the brass key to the ancestral room. For 21 years, she had lit incense there before dawn. She had prepared rice cakes for memorial tables, polished the brass bowls, and bowed even when no member of the Kang family joined her. This time she broke custom. She walked across the room in outdoor shoes, past the tablets bearing the names of Min-jae's father and grandfather, and placed the key beneath Jun-seok's empty memorial frame. The violation was deliberate. She was refusing to honor a man as dead. Min-jae removed Jun-seok's frame from the wall. Behind it waited a narrow keyhole. The brass crane turned once. A panel released inside the cedar wall, revealing a shallow compartment. It contained no missing ledger. There was only a hotel keycard from Lagos, a strip of faded kente cloth, and a photograph of Amara taken 5 years earlier beneath a canopy of white flowers. She was younger, dressed in indigo, holding a tray at an international shipping reception. Jun-seok stood blurred in the background. A date had been written across the reverse in his hand. The date was the night Nari was conceived. Min-jae laid the photograph on the floor between himself and Amara. His index finger rested beside his brother's blurred figure. The accusation did not need a voice. Had she known Jun-seok? Had the one night she shared with Min-jae been an accident, or had she been moving through a plan that began before he saw her? Amara took the hotel keycard and held it beneath the lamp. A shallow cut crossed its magnetic strip. She then removed the silver employment card that had opened the estate gate. The same cut appeared in the same place. Someone had copied an old access marker into her new life. She placed both cards beside the photograph and turned them toward Sun-hee. The housekeeper sank to her knees. From inside her sleeve, Sun-hee withdrew a hospital bracelet no larger than 2 fingers. Nari Okafor had been printed across it beside the date of birth. The band had been cut, disinfected, and preserved for 4 years. Amara had thrown it away before leaving the maternity clinic. Sun-hee had been following them since the child was born. Min-jae moved so quickly that the incense flame bent. Dae-hyun blocked the door, not the housekeeper, preventing the guards outside from witnessing what came next. Sun-hee remained on her knees. She pressed both palms to the floor and bowed until her forehead touched the cedar boards, offering no defense except the evidence laid before them. Then she raised one hand and pointed to Jun-seok's empty frame. The first layer of the mystery opened. Jun-seok had learned that Chairman Kang Tae-sung, his own uncle, was selling Hanul shipping routes to the Baeko faction, a rival organization that trafficked people inside refrigerated cargo. Jun-seok planned to expose him. He hid the access key inside the Tiger and carried the evidence through Lagos, where a port partnership gave him access to accounts outside Korean control. Sun-hee had helped him. She had believed the key vanished when Jun-seok disappeared. Years later, a private clinic submitted Nari's blood type during treatment for newborn jaundice. The rare combination matched a protected Kang family record. Sun-hee intercepted the alert before Tae-sung's people could trace it. She took the bracelet, altered the electronic file, and watched from a distance. When Baeko men began following Nari's daycare, she brought mother and child behind Min-jae's walls. Her protection had also been surveillance. Her loyalty had also been theft. Every answer made Amara's position worse. Nari's blood had awakened a system built to locate heirs. Jun-seok's key had appeared in a room prepared for her arrival. Someone wanted Min-jae to believe Amara had carried the missing ledger for 5 years. Someone else wanted Tae-sung to discover a child with Kang blood. Either Sun-hee had lost control of her own rescue, or the rescue had never belonged to her. Min-jae picked up the hospital bracelet. Amara tore it from his hand. The guards outside heard the movement and reached beneath their coats. Dae-hyun lowered his palm, keeping them in place. Min-jae did not retaliate. He opened his hand and let her see the red mark her nails had left. Then he turned that hand over. The crescent scar beneath his thumb matched Nari's. Amara covered the child's hand with her own. Min-jae's attention shifted to the gesture. Suspicion remained, but something else entered beside it. Not certainty. Certainty would have been easier. It was the first dangerous shape of hope. The estate changed around them. Amara and Nari were moved from the service wing to a guest suite beside Min-jae's rooms. The door could be locked from inside. Dae-hyun installed a camera facing outward and left the interior untouched. Min-jae placed 2 guards in the corridor, then removed them when Nari refused to sleep beneath the sound of their shoes. He took the chair outside himself. At 2 in the morning, Amara found Min-jae beneath the corridor lamp, the vanished ledger's empty case across his knees. Nari had placed her yellow slippers beside his polished shoes. Amara left him ginger and honey, Aunt Ngozie's remedy for every harmattan cough. He lifted the cup with both hands, answering an Igbo act of care with Korean courtesy. It became the first exchange neither of them tried to control. The next days unfolded under lockdown. Snow dusted the pine branches. Black cars idled beyond the gate. Inside, Dae-hyun reconstructed the house breach, while Min-jae searched the legitimate books of Mirai logistics. Amara continued working, refusing the silk clothes delivered to her suite, and wearing the gray maid's uniform until the cuffs frayed. Min-jae stopped allowing her to clean his study. Instead, he began leaving the door open when she passed. Through that opening, she saw the architecture of his power. Maps of Busan terminals covered one wall. Photographs of union leaders, customs officers, and rival captains covered another. Red lines connected men who smiled together at charity galas and arranged each other's ruin before dessert. Yet the largest board held no enemies. It held missing workers, Filipino deckhands, Korean drivers, a Senegalese mechanic, 2 Vietnamese sisters, and a Ghanaian student whose families had never received bodies. Jun-seok's disappearance stood among theirs. Min-jae had been collecting the people his empire failed to return. On the 7th night, a delivery arrived from Itaewon. Inside were yams, dried crayfish, scent leaf, and a sack of rice marked with a Nigerian brand. No note accompanied it. The kitchen staff examined the yam as if it were a difficult stone. Amara found Min-jae in the doorway, sleeves rolled back, watching Sun-hee search for instructions on a tablet. Amara took the knife from the housekeeper and cut the yam into thick coins. She showed the cook how little palm oil was needed, how long onions should soften, and when to add peppers so flavor arrived before heat. Sun-hee contributed anchovy broth to the greens. The result belonged to no recipe either woman had inherited, but Nari ate 2 bowls. Min-jae tasted it last. He set aside his silver spoon and used the wooden one Nari had abandoned, an intimacy Korean households normally reserved for family. Amara noticed. He noticed her noticing. Neither looked away. The romance did not begin with desire. Desire had already betrayed them once by creating a life inside a night that ended before morning. What grew now was slower and less forgiving. It formed when Min-jae checked the heat of Nari's bathwater with his wrist. It deepened when Amara replaced the dressing across his ribs after a convoy returned with a shattered window. It entered the spaces where fear had been, asking each of them what would remain if survival no longer required distance. Nari tested that question without caution. She began leaving objects in Min-jae's path, a purple crayon on his desk, one of her hair clips beside his watch, a paper crown on the hood of his armored sedan. He returned each item repaired, sharpened, or reinforced. The paper crown came back lined with thin cardboard so rain could not collapse it. One afternoon, she found him asleep in the library. Min-jae never slept where another person could approach. His men knew that. Amara knew it from Lagos. Yet exhaustion had pulled him under beside a stack of shipping records. Nari climbed onto the sofa and placed the reinforced crown on his chest. His hand closed around her wrist before his eyes opened. The reflex frightened them both. Nari did not cry. She opened her small fingers and let the crown fall. Min-jae released her as if burned, then moved to the opposite end of the room. He remained there, one palm flat against the glass, refusing to come closer. Amara could have taken the child away. Instead, she sat on the floor between them and began sorting the scattered shipping pages by date. Nari joined her. After several minutes, Min-jae returned and lowered himself beside the pile. 3 people built order out of his brother's unfinished work while snow erased the garden beyond the windows. Among the records, Amara found a recurring payment to the hospital where Nari had been born. The account belonged to Kang Hae-suk. Min-jae's mother had known. They crossed the covered walkway to the eastern pavilion before sunset. Hae-suk received them in a room warmed by a charcoal brazier. She wore cream silk and held a string of amber prayer beads. Her posture did not alter when she saw Nari. Only the beads stopped moving. On a low table waited 3 objects: a baby hanbok, a Nigerian passport photograph of Amara, and an envelope bearing the seal of the Kang Family Foundation. Hae-suk had not merely known, she had prepared. Amara lifted the baby garment. Its white collar had been embroidered with a tiny tiger on one side and a red geometric spiral on the other, an attempt at an Igbo uli motif, copied by someone who had studied photographs but never asked permission. 4 years of careful stitches lay inside the seams. Hae-suk's hands carried needle marks. The foundation envelope contained proof of monthly transfers to Aunt Ngozi's clinic in Enugu. They had been routed through a maternal health grant, arriving whenever the small neighborhood practice risked closing. Amara had celebrated those grants without knowing the money crossed Min-jae's family table first. Protection, again, with the shape of control. Amara placed the garment back and pushed the envelope away. Hae-suk's chin lifted. The distance between the women filled with 2 forms of motherhood. One believed love created the right to intervene. The other had survived because she trusted no intervention that arrived without consent. Nari crossed that distance carrying the prayer beads Hae-suk had dropped. The child returned them with both hands and bowed. Then she touched the coral bracelet at Amara's wrist, turned it outward, and showed Hae-suk the carved elephant charm, one inheritance beside another. Hae-suk accepted the beads with both hands. Her bow to Nari was shallow, but it existed. On the way out, Min-jae saw a recent security photograph beneath his mother's writing mat. It showed Tae-sung entering the Eastern Pavilion 3 nights before Amara arrived. Hae-suk had been watched too. The estate lockdown tightened. Min-jae moved his mother to the main house. Amara surrendered her phone after receiving an image of Aunt Ngozi's clinic taken from across the Enugu street. A black vehicle waited in the photograph. Threat had crossed continents without needing to cross a border. For the first time, running would not save Nari. It would only move danger toward the people Amara loved. She entered Min-jae's study and placed her Nigerian passport in his open safe. He understood the decision. She was staying. In return, he removed the Hanul circle signet from his finger and placed it beside her passport. Without the ring, his captains could question every command. He was giving her the object that held his authority, not as a gift, but as proof that her presence would not become captivity. Amara shut the safe on both. That night, the power failed again. This time, the emergency lights did not come on. Glass broke in the western wing. Smoke rolled beneath the pantry door, pale and odorless, designed to confuse sensors rather than burn the house. Dae-hyun's team moved toward the false breach. A second group rose from the old service tunnel beneath the eastern pavilion, using plans known only to the Kang family. Amara woke to an empty child's bed. Nari's reinforced paper crown lay in the corridor. Beside it, one yellow slipper pointed toward the ancestral room. Amara ran barefoot through the dark. Min-jae appeared at the crossing hallway, weapon drawn, blood darkening one shoulder. They saw the slipper at the same moment. He reached the ancestral room first, and stopped so suddenly, Amara struck his back. 4 masked men stood between the memorial table and the cedar wall. One held the open tiger. Another held the brass key. The third had one arm around Nari's waist. The fourth aimed toward the entrance. Candlelight caught the edges of their rifles and made long black bars across the floor. Nari clutched a torn Polaroid. The searchers had cut open Amara's suitcase and found it behind the birth certificate. In the faded image, Min-jae slept in a Lagos hotel chair with his shirt open at the throat. Amara's coral bracelet circled his wrist. She had taken the photograph at dawn because, for 1 weak minute, she wanted proof that the tenderness had existed. Nari had seen the picture before the intruders pulled her from the room. Now she looked from the sleeping man in the photograph to the armed man in the doorway. "Is that my daddy?" Nari asked, pointing at Kang Min-jae while masked rifles closed around her. The ruthless boss dropped to his knees, opened his empty hands, and placed his body between the child and every gun. His pistol slid across the cedar floor. Amara had imagined the truth breaking through anger, accusation, or a laboratory result. Instead, it entered the world through a child's clear voice and the sight of Korea's most feared man, making himself smaller so she would not be afraid. The gunman holding Nari tightened his grip. Min-jae did not look at him. His attention stayed on the child. He placed his scarred hand flat on the floor, crescent mark visible. Nari stared at it. Then she forced her own hand free and opened her palm toward him. The same pale crescent answered from her skin. One of the masked men hesitated. In the Hanul circle, bloodline still carried an authority older than firearms. Tae-sung had sent hired men, but one of them had once served Min-jae's father. The sight of the matching marks fractured his obedience, his rifle lowered by less than an inch. Amara moved on that inch. She swept the memorial cloth from the table. Brass bowls struck the floor, scattering chestnuts, pears, and rice cakes beneath the intruder's feet. Min-jae surged forward from his knees. Dae-hyun entered through the hidden panel behind the cedar wall. The room exploded into movement without a shot finding the child. Amara caught Nari as Min-jae turned his back to the raised weapons. A bullet broke Jun-seok's empty frame. Another buried itself in the ceiling. Dae-hyun's men closed from both doors. Within seconds, the masked group had lost the geometry of control. The last intruder escaped through the hidden passage with the brass key. He left the open tiger behind. Inside its hollow body, beneath the place where the key had rested, Min-jae found a strip of microfilm no wider than a fingernail. Jun-seok had hidden more than one secret. As alarms washed the estate in red, Nari reached from Amara's arms and touched Min-jae's face. He remained on his knees. His hands, which had never trembled while holding a weapon, could not remain still beneath the weight of her palm. Amara did not confirm the child's question with words. She took Min-jae's scarred hand and placed it against Nari's back, directly over the fierce beat of her heart. The truth finally had a body. Then Dae-hyun developed the microfilm and found the signature at the bottom of Jun-seok's last transaction. It did not belong to Tae-sung. It belonged to Kang Hae-suk. The microfilm contained 12 photographed pages. 11 were fragments of shipping manifests. The last showed a transfer from the Kang Family Foundation to an offshore account registered under Amara's full name. $10 million had moved through it on the morning after the Lagos reception. Hae-suk's signature authorized the payment. Jun-seok's fingerprint marked the margin. By sunrise, Amara had become a suspect inside the house that had nearly killed her child. Dae-hyun removed the guards from her door and placed them at both ends of the corridor. Senior captains arrived in dark sedans, carrying the old rules of the Hanul Circle in their posture. To them, a foreign maid had entered the master's home, produced a hidden heir, and reopened the wound of a vanished brother. The money made the story simple enough to believe. Min-jae made it impossible. He entered the council room with Nari asleep against his chest. Her curls covered the silk lapel of his suit. One yellow slipper was missing. In his free hand he carried the offshore record, the hospital bracelet, and the Hanul signet Amara had locked in his safe. He placed the signet before the captains. Then he laid the financial record on top of it and tore both photographed copies in half. The gesture carried a cost everyone understood. He was refusing to let the circle judge the mother of his child, even if that refusal weakened his right to command. One captain pushed back his chair. Another removed his loyalty pin. A third remained seated but turned his teacup upside down, withdrawing support without spilling a drop. Min-jae watched his empire divide while Nari slept through the sound. Amara stood behind the carved screen. She saw each sacrifice and hated that it moved her. Protection had once meant men deciding where she should live, which records should disappear, and how much silence her fear could purchase. Min-jae's protection was different because it kept making him poorer. He surrendered authority each time he used it for her. That difference did not create trust. It created the possibility of earning it. After the captains left, Amara returned to the clinic with Nari. She brought 2 sealed envelopes. Into the first went strands from the child's hairbrush, collected beneath the nurse's camera. Into the second went the swab Min-jae took from inside his own cheek. He waited across the room, hands visible, while Amara signed every custody seal. 2 days later, the result arrived. The probability printed beneath their names was greater than 99.99%. Min-jae read the page once. He did not lift Nari. He did not claim her. He carried the result to Amara and placed it in her hands, leaving the final distance untouched. Amara crossed it. She guided Nari beside him, took the child's right hand, and set it inside his open palm. Then she folded his fingers around it. Fatherhood entered Min-jae's life without celebration. It arrived as weight. Nari pulled him toward the clinic window to show him snow caught on the ambulance lights. He followed because she expected him to. In that instant, Korea's most feared organizer ceased to be the center of his own decisions. The change spread through the estate in practical ways. Weapons disappeared from visible holsters. The pond received a child-proof rail. Min-jae moved council meetings to a warehouse office because Nari disliked men filling the house with winter coats. He learned to secure her car seat, failed twice, then studied the mechanism until Dae-hyun stopped reaching to help. A drawer in his study filled with crayons. The red one remained uncapped and ruined 3 white shirts. At night, he sat outside Nari's room until her breathing settled. Amara sometimes found him there after returning from the laundry. He never crossed the threshold without permission. The man who controlled ports waited for a 4-year-old's hand to reach from beneath a blanket before entering. One morning, Nari carried a comb to him. Amara's hands paused over the breakfast tray. Hair was not a small matter. Nari's curls held the patience of every wash day Amara remembered from childhood, her mother parting sections on a low stool, while highlife drifted from a neighbor's radio. In Seoul, strangers had treated those curls as public property. Amara allowed few people to touch them. Min-jae understood the boundary, even if he did not know its history. He placed the comb down and waited. Nari climbed between his knees. Amara brought coconut oil, showed him how to support each section, and guided his fingers through one careful twist. His first parting was crooked, his second held. When Nari ran toward the garden with 6 uneven twists, Min-jae gathered every fallen strand from his suit and placed it in Amara's palm instead of letting it reach another laboratory. That was the moment her fear of him began to loosen. The next threat came through a video from Enugu. Aunt Ngozie's clinic stood dark during evening hours. Its new generator had been stripped. Cabinets lay open. No one appeared in the frame except a man who crossed the far window wearing a white crane pin. Jun-seok's symbol. Amara packed before the video ended. Min-jae prepared the private aircraft. Hee-seok blocked the entrance hall in mourning white, her amber beads wrapped twice around her wrist. She placed one hand against Nari's chest and the other against the door. The message was unmistakable. The child should remain in Seoul under Kang protection. Amara moved Nari behind her. 2 mothers faced one another again, divided by the meaning of safety. Hee-seok believed walls protected blood. Amara had watched armed men rise through those walls. She believed a child belonged near the person who would burn every map rather than lose her. Min-jae ended the struggle by placing 3 passports on the entrance table. He had obtained a Korean travel document for Nari through an emergency family order, but he set it beneath her Nigerian passport. He would not erase one nation to add another. Hee-seok saw the order and stepped away from the door. Before Nari left, the older woman wrapped the child in the handmade hanbok coat. Amara fastened her coral elephant charm at its collar. Hee-seok did not remove it. The plane crossed 11,000 kilometers through a night without stars. Min-jae left Seoul as a boss with a fractured organization. He landed in Nigeria as a man no title could protect, from a family that had raised his daughter in his absence. Lagos met them with heat, horns, salt, and the low vibration of generators. Harmattan dust softened the airport lights. At the private terminal, Min-jae's black suit became a dark flag among linen shirts and bright prints. Dae-hyun scanned rooftops. Nari pressed both hands to the window, delighted by yellow buses, hawkers weaving between cars, and billboards larger than buildings. Amara's body remembered the city before her mind allowed it. Her shoulders changed. Her pace widened. At a roadside stop, she tied Nari to her back with a wrapper while signing a security form, the practiced movement startling Min-jae more than any weapon had. Here, she was not the quiet maid who knew the estate's side doors. She was a daughter, returning with unfinished truth. Aunt Ngozi waited at the clinic in Enugu after the connecting flight east. She was a broad-shouldered woman in her late 50s, wearing a green head wrap and the expression of someone who had survived widowing, inflation, and government inspectors without becoming impressed by expensive cars. She embraced Amara first. She lifted Nari until the child's feet left the ground. Then she faced Min-jae. He bowed in the Korean manner, deep and exact. Ngozi did not bow back. She pointed toward a basin beside the clinic door. Min-jae removed his watch, rolled his sleeves, and washed the red dust from his hands. Then she gave him a towel and placed a plate of cola nuts on the table. He waited until she broke one and offered the first piece. Only after accepting it with both hands did he enter. The exchange was not forgiveness. It was admission. Inside, the clinic carried evidence of the break-in. Medicine boxes had been emptied across the floor. The ultrasound machine stood open at the back. Patient files had been disturbed, but cash remained inside an unlocked drawer. The intruders had searched for information, not money. Ngozi led them to the maternity room and moved the examination bed. Beneath a loose tile lay a courier envelope dated 5 years earlier. The blue crane seal had been cut in half. Inside was a second piece of microfilm. Amara stared at her aunt. Ngozi held the gaze, then placed her hand over Amara's coral bracelet. The old woman had hidden the package because the courier arrived 3 days after Amara learned she was pregnant. A Korean man had already followed her home. Ngozi trusted neither the sender nor the frightened daughter who still woke, reaching for someone she refused to name. That choice had protected Nari. It had also prolonged every mystery. Min-jae accepted the microfilm without anger. He passed it to Amara before examining it, allowing her to decide whether his family received what hers had guarded. She placed it in his palm. The second film completed the photographed records. The offshore account in Amara's name was not a payment to her. It was an emergency holding company established to purchase a decommissioned vessel called Morning Calm. Jun-seok had signed the transfer. Jun-seok had used the vessel to escape the Baeko ambush off the Nigerian coast. The final manifest listed one survivor under a false name. Jun-seok had not died beside the Han River. He had never been in the car. The address connected to the false identity belonged to a technology cooperative in Yaba. They returned to Lagos before dawn. Amara left Nari with Ngozi and 2 female guards from Dae-hyun's team. Min-jae took only Dae-hyun and Amara to the cooperative. He no longer decided danger for her. He opened the car door and waited. She entered by choice. The building occupied the upper floors of a converted printing house. Solar batteries lined the stairwell. Young programmers slept beside screens running port security simulations. Korean labels appeared beside Yoruba and English notes on the walls. The cooperative had spent years tracing cargo through systems that powerful men assumed African ports could not audit. At the far end, behind glass clouded by rain, Kang Jun-seok stood alive. He was thinner than the portrait, his left leg supported by a metal brace, gray threaded through hair that should still have been black. The wooden tiger's cord hung around his neck without its pendant. Beside him stood Aisha Bello, a Nigerian maritime data specialist whose company had been destroyed after she exposed trafficked workers hidden in container records. She wore Jun-seok's crane pin on her jacket. Min-jae crossed the room and stopped one step from his brother. 5 years of mourning had prepared him for a body, not a living man who had chosen absence. His fist rose. Jun-seok did not defend himself. At the last second, Min-jae drove his hand into the wall beside his brother's head. Plaster dust fell across both their shoulders like pale ash. Jun-seok removed the crane pin from Aisha's jacket and placed it on the table. Then he set down 3 objects: Hye-suk's original bank authorization, a photograph of Tae-sung meeting Baeko captains, and a recent image of Nari outside her daycare. The employment card had come from Jun-seok. He had brought Amara into the Kang estate. His intention was visible in the operation spread across the screens. The hidden heir would force Min-jae to search the old family records. The tiger would open the compartment. Tae-sung, seeing the key move, would expose his own network trying to seize it. Jun-seok had designed a trap large enough to catch the man who destroyed their family. He had placed a child at its center. Amara swept the documents from the table. Screens flickered as pages fell. Aisha moved toward the keyboard, but Jun-seok raised one hand. He accepted Amara's fury. He lowered himself onto his braced knee before her, not in Korean hierarchy or Nigerian ceremony, but in the universal posture of a man who could not defend what he had done. Min-jae took the Hanyul signet from his pocket and dropped it at Jun-seok's feet. The gesture carried 2 meanings. The elder brother could reclaim the circle, and the younger brother would no longer protect a strategy that treated his daughter as leverage. Jun-seok left the ring where it fell. Brother faced brother across an authority neither wanted for the same reason. Min-jae had begun dismantling himself to become a father. Jun-seok had sacrificed his name to destroy the machine their father built. Between them lay an empire that had taught both men to confuse love with secrecy. Amara picked up the signet. She did not return it to either brother. She placed it inside her bag. For the next 3 days, the cooperative became a war room. No conversations carried the story forward. Screens did. Shipping routes turned red. Shell companies opened like nested boxes. Aisha matched faces from Korean port photographs with passport scans in Lagos. Dae-hyun traced the estate tunnel access to a security contractor owned by Tae-sung's daughter. Amara recognized the logo of the hotel where she had worked 5 years earlier. The hotel reception had been the first stage of the trap. Jun-seok had arranged the event to meet Aisha and secure the evidence. Min-jae had arrived unexpectedly after learning his brother was under surveillance. Amara, then an assistant banquet manager, found Min-jae injured in a service stairwell after Baeko men entered the hotel. She hid him inside an empty bridal suite, replaced his torn jacket with a staff coat, and guided him past the kitchen during a power cut. The coral bracelet had caught on his cuff. The wooden tiger had fallen from Jun-seok's evidence bag into Min-jae's pocket. By dawn, adrenaline had dissolved into the brief tenderness both of them later punished themselves for needing. Amara left before the hotel woke because she saw armed men bowing to him in the lobby and understood that the stranger was not escaping danger. He belonged to it. She did not know one of those men photographed her passport before she reached the airport. Tae-sung had known her name from the beginning. Jun-seok's recent photograph of Nari proved he had not been the only watcher at the daycare. A reflected car window showed a man wearing Tae-sung's family security badge. The rival had learned about the child months earlier. He did not yet have a legal blood test, but the estate standoff had given him witnesses. The hidden heir was no longer hidden. A message reached Min-jae through the Seoul Stock Exchange. Tae-sung called an emergency shareholder meeting for Mirai Logistics and submitted evidence, accusing Min-jae of transferring company assets to an offshore account, controlled by Amara. The forged record named her as his foreign mistress and Jun-seok's accomplice. Korean tabloids received Nari's daycare photograph within the hour. The screen filled with the child's face. Comments multiplied beneath it, weighing her skin, her curls, her nationality, and her right to a family name. Some treated her as proof of scandal. Others romanticized her as an exotic heiress. Almost none saw a 4-year-old who slept with one foot outside the blanket and hated peas. Min-jae closed the laptop with such force the hinge cracked. Amara opened it again. Hiding had allowed other people to author Nari's identity. Amara downloaded the photograph, cropped out the daycare sign, and sent it to Hae-suk with a scan of the paternity result. Then she placed both passports beside the screen. Nigerian, Korean, neither beneath the other. Hae-suk understood. In Seoul, the Kang matriarch entered the foundation hall, wearing black hanbok edged in green and coral. At her side stood Sun-hee, carrying the handmade child's coat. Cameras gathered for the shareholder crisis. Hae-suk did not issue a statement. She placed Nari's 2 passports on the podium, set the paternity result between them, and bowed toward the cameras until her forehead nearly reached her hands. The bow acknowledged the child publicly. It also apologized to the mother without asking the mother to disappear. The market reacted with chaos. The family could not retreat. Tae-sung answered by taking Hae-suk. Her convoy vanished between the foundation hall and the estate. The lead car was found beneath an underpass, doors open, amber prayer beads scattered across the rear seat. One bead had been crushed into the upholstery beside a blue crane pin. Jun-seok's symbol had been planted to frame the living son she had hidden. Min-jae prepared to return to Seoul. Jun-seok prepared the ledger for prosecutors in both countries. Aisha copied the files across independent servers. Amara called Ngozi's clinic through a secure line and saw Nari asleep beneath a mosquito net, the paper crown beside her pillow. For 1 hour, the plan held. Then the clinic cameras failed. When the feed returned, Ngozi lay conscious but bound to a chair. The guards were gone. Nari's bed was empty. On the mattress rested Min-jae's onyx ring, the one he had removed at the clinic in Seoul and never recovered after the first blackout. Tae-sung had reached across both families at once. He held Hae-suk in Korea and Nari in Nigeria. He demanded the complete ledger, the brass key, and Jun-seok's public surrender. The exchange location was encoded inside the Morning Calm manifest. Min-jae reached for the Hanel signet in Amara's bag. She closed her hand around it first. Then she put the ring on her own finger. For 5 years, powerful families had moved her like a hidden piece across their board. Now Amara used the symbol of their empire to summon every Hanul captain still loyal to the bloodline. She sent them not toward Min-jae, not toward Jun-seok, but toward a Nigerian child with both families in her veins. One by one, the captains turned their cars toward the airport. The Empire answered the Maid. The Morning Calm had not sailed in 7 years. It rested beyond the commercial lights of Apapa port, chained to a neglected berth where black water folded against its hull. Rust marked the name, but the blue crane painted beneath it remained visible. Jun-seok had used the vessel to escape one family betrayal. Tae-sung had chosen it to complete another. Rain arrived from the Atlantic before midnight. Amara approached the berth in a white linen dress beneath a black raincoat. The Hanul signet circled her finger. In one hand she carried the brass key recovered from the man who fled the estate. Dae-hyun had found him attempting to cross through Lomé with a false passport. In the other hand she carried a silver case containing the complete ledger. Min-jae walked 6 steps behind her with no visible weapon. The distance was part of the demand. It was also a measure of trust. He could see her. He could reach her if the night broke open. Yet he was allowing her to lead an operation built around her own child. Across the world, Jun-seok entered an abandoned cold storage terminal near Incheon. Aisha guided him through its cameras from Lagos. Hanul captains surrounded the roads without showing themselves. Inside the terminal, Hae-suk sat beneath a hanging work light, wrists bound with her own amber beads. Tae-sung waited beside her in a gray overcoat, watching the morning calm through a live screen. 2 ports. One family divided by an ocean. One ledger holding both scenes together. Amara stepped onto the ship. Men appeared along the upper rail. Their clothes carried no insignia, but several wore Korean earpieces, and others the plain boots of hired port security. Tae-sung had built his network by making corruption look local wherever it landed. The people at the bottom rarely knew whose fear they were protecting. Nari stood inside the bridge behind a wall of rain-streaked glass. Her hands were free. Her hanbok coat was torn at one sleeve, coral charm still fastened near her throat. She saw Amara and struck both palms against the window. A masked guard pulled her back. Min-jae stopped moving. The stillness around him became more frightening than rage. Amara continued up the gangway. She reached the center of the deck and placed the silver case beneath a crane painted on the boards. A camera above the bridge turned toward the signet on her finger. In Incheon, Tae-sung saw it and leaned closer to his screen. He had spent decades believing symbols controlled people. The ledger controlled Jun-seok. The circle controlled Min-jae. Motherhood controlled Amara. Bloodline controlled Hae-suk. He did not understand that love had changed each symbol by changing what its owner was willing to lose. Amara removed the signet. She set it into the brass key's round bow. The 2 pieces fitted together, forming a seal Jun-seok had never discovered. When she pressed it against the silver case, a hidden transmitter activated inside the lining. Aisha's servers received the signal. The ledger began uploading to prosecutors, maritime agencies, labor unions, and investigative desks in Seoul, Abuja, Busan, and Lagos. Not only Tae-sung's crimes moved across the network. Min-jae had insisted on including his own accounts. Port intimidation, hidden payments, illegal arbitration, and every favor that built the Hanul Circle into a shadow government traveled with the evidence. He did not ask Jun-seok to clean his name. He did not preserve a private copy for leverage. He chose to become powerless before anyone could use power to threaten his child again. In Incheon, Tae-sung saw the upload counter appear. He struck the screen. Jun-seok used the second of distraction to pull the hanging light down. Darkness covered the terminal. Hae-suk rolled beneath the conveyor frame as Hanul captains entered from the loading bays. No gunfire was needed. Men who had served Tae-sung while he seemed inevitable lowered their weapons when the evidence reached their phones. His empire ended first in their posture. On the morning calm, the masked guard dragged Nari from the bridge and toward a waiting launch. Amara ran. A second man caught her coat. She slipped out of it, leaving the fabric in his hands, and crossed the wet deck in bare white sleeves. Min-jae broke the 6-step distance. He reached the stairs as a warning shot tore splinters from the rail. Dae-hyun's team rose from workboats on both sides of the berth. Nigerian marine police lights appeared beyond the breakwater. Dock workers shut the loading gates. Aisha had not only released data, she had sent every movement of the vessel to people who understood the port better than the men paid to occupy it. The morning calm became a locked room surrounded by witnesses. Nari twisted from the guard's grip and bit his glove. He recoiled. Amara caught the child around the waist. Their momentum carried both toward the open edge of the deck. Min-jae reached them and took the impact against his injured shoulder. One hand closed around the rail, the other held Amara's wrist. Nari was trapped safely between their bodies while rain turned the world beyond them into gray water. The Hanyul signet slid across the deck. It passed through the scupper and disappeared into the Atlantic. No one reached for it. Dae-hyun's men secured the bridge. Marine officers crossed the gangway. The hired guards surrendered one by one as their escape routes vanished. Amara carried Nari down the stairs. Min-jae followed only after every other person had left the exposed deck, his hand pressed against a shoulder that would never move the same way again. At the bottom of the gangway, cameras waited. The scandal had reached the port before the family did. Reporters pushed against police barriers. Min-jae could have covered Nari's face. Instead, he removed his coat and held it above her against the rain, leaving himself visible. Amara walked beside him, rather than behind. Nari held one hand from each parent. The image crossed Korea before dawn. This time, the family had authored the frame. The public saw a Nigerian mother who had led officers to a trafficking ledger, a Korean father who had exposed his own organization, and the child they had brought home together. At Incheon, Tae-sung was taken through a side entrance beneath a blanket of camera flashes. Hee-suk refused an ambulance until Jun-seok entered beside her. She touched the metal brace at his leg, the evidence of years she had imagined but never seen. Then she struck his chest once with her open palm. The blow held a mother's rage. The embrace that followed held everything else. By morning, the Hanyul circle had broken apart. Captains traded information for protection. Shell companies froze. The clean parts of Mirai Logistics entered court supervision, leaving thousands of ordinary workers uncertain whether sacrifice at the top would cost wages below. Amara identified the salaries most at risk. Aisha mapped legal payment routes. Jun-seok sold private holdings, and Hee-suk sold the pearl clasp from the old family portrait. Redemption would not be financed by invisible workers. Ngozi reopened her clinic with a generator purchased through no hidden foundation. This time the invoice bore Amara's name and the cooperative's public account. Every contribution could be seen. Every condition could be refused. The difference mattered. Min-jae returned to Seoul under investigation, not in handcuffs but without a passport. His cooperation prevented immediate detention. It did not erase consequence. For months, he spent each morning inside a prosecution office and each evening in the estate stripped of guards, convoys, and council meetings. Rooms designed for power became too large for 3 people. Amara returned with Nari after Ngozi recovered. She did not resume the maid's uniform. On her first morning back, she removed every staff schedule from the kitchen wall and replaced it with formal contracts. Overtime, leave, health coverage, and clear duties appeared where personal loyalty had once been treated as compensation. Sun-hee signed first. Other workers followed. No one bowed while signing. Amara accepted a position on the court-appointed transition team for Mirai Logistics. Her experience in hospitality, languages, and invisible labor gave her insight the executives lacked. She knew how a polished room depended on people guests were trained not to see. She used that knowledge to build worker reporting systems across hotels, warehouses, and shipping depots. Complaints no longer traveled through a boss's private mercy. They entered records that could survive him. Min-jae watched her occupy boardrooms where men once discussed her as evidence. He never interrupted. When a director addressed questions to him instead of her, Min-jae turned his chair toward Amara and waited. The director learned where authority had moved. Their romance grew inside the aftermath, where fantasy could no longer hide either person. Min-jae woke from dreams, with one hand reaching beneath his pillow for a weapon that was no longer there. Amara did not soothe him with easy forgiveness. She switched on the lamp, placed his scarred palm against the safe wood of the bedside table, and waited until he recognized the room. When Amara froze at the sound of an unfamiliar car outside Nari's school, Min-jae did not dismiss the fear. He walked the entire route with her, checked every camera, then let her choose whether the child stayed. Trust became repetition. It was school pickups completed on time. It was financial documents left unlocked. It was the absence of surveillance in Amara's room. It was Min-jae submitting his blood, accounts, and history to institutions he could not command. It was Amara returning after every journey, because return had become a choice. Nari made fatherhood less solemn. She covered Min-jae's prosecution binders with animal stickers and learned not to pull his injured shoulder. At a daycare sports day, another parent stared too long at Amara. Min-jae started to rise. Nari placed a rice cake in his hand, and he sat again. Protection was learning when not to strike. Spring returned to Seoul with yellow forsythia along the walls. Nari's 5th birthday approached. Hae-suk prepared seaweed soup at the estate kitchen herself. She invited Ngozi to Seoul without routing the ticket through an assistant. The invitation included every itinerary detail and a return date chosen by Ngozi. When the Nigerian matriarch arrived, Hae-suk waited at the front gate. The Korean woman bowed. The Igbo woman placed a hand over her heart. Then each repeated the other's gesture. It was awkward, exact, and more honest than instant affection. They entered the kitchen together. Hae-suk showed Ngozi how to rinse seaweed until the salt softened. Ngozi showed Hae-suk how to toast egusi without burning it. Their first shared stew was too thick for one woman and too mild for the other. Nari ate it over rice and asked for more through the enthusiastic lift of her empty bowl. The grandmothers looked at each other and kept the recipe. For the birthday, Nari wore the handmade hanbok with coral beads sewn carefully along the ribbon. Beneath it, she wore bright sneakers sent by cousins in Enugu. At the low Korean table, she received seaweed soup. At the taller table beside it, Ngozi broke kola nut and distributed the pieces to family. Jun-seok attended with Aisha, walking without the brace for several steps before accepting her arm. Sun-hee placed an extra bowl before Jun-seok, restoring the birthday meal denied to both brothers for years. Min-jae did not sit at the head. He sat beside Nari, where she had placed his name card in purple crayon. After the meal, he presented documents adding his paternity to both Korean and Nigerian records. The Korean registry identified her as Kang Nari. Her Nigerian documents preserved Nari Chiamaka Okafor. No hyphen could fully explain her, and no single order of names was forced to do so. The family stored both documents together, beneath the coral bracelet and the repaired wooden tiger. The tiger no longer contained a key. Nari filled it with red beans from the birthday table. When shaken, the object made a soft sound like rain inside wood. Min-jae's case concluded in early summer. The court recognized his cooperation, the rescue operation, and the evidence that dismantled the trafficking routes. It also recognized the years in which he had benefited from illegal control. He received a suspended custodial sentence, strict financial supervision, and years of public restitution work. He lost voting power in Mirai logistics. He could no longer direct private security beyond ordinary protection. The judgment left him free and answerable. Outside the courthouse, former captains waited across the street. Some lowered their heads, others turned away. Min-jae did not cross toward them. Amara stood beneath a ginkgo tree with Nari. He walked to his family carrying no ring. That evening, he placed the last key to the Western study in Amara's palm. She closed his fingers around it and led him to the door. Together they emptied the room. Maps came down. Enemy photographs went into evidence boxes. The board of missing workers remained. Beside every face, Amara added the current status of the family search. Jun-seok and Aisha connected the board to a new cross-border recovery program funded from seized assets. What had been a private monument to guilt became accountable work. At midnight, only the large, dark desk remained. Min-jae turned it toward the windows, so the person sitting there would face the garden instead of the door. Amara placed Nari's jar of crayons in the center. The room no longer belonged to a boss. It belonged to whatever their family could build without fear. Min-jae did not propose with a ring. Rings had carried too much in his family. The onyx ring had marked violence. The Hanuel signet had represented obedience. Instead, he traveled with Amara and Nari to Enugu at the end of the rainy season. He entered Ngozi's compound in a simple navy kaftan, sewn by Amara's cousin, carrying no convoy and only gifts whose origins could be traced. He brought fine Korean silk for the elders, boxes of pears, tea, and a handwritten accounting of every expense. More important, he brought the paternity records, the court judgment, and the employment contracts Amara had written. He placed proof of who he had been, beside proof of what he was changing. Before the assembled family, Min-jae bowed until both knees touched the ground. No one rushed to lift him. Ngozi allowed the silence to test his patience. Uncles studied the man who had missed 4 years of Nari's life. Aunts examined Amara's posture more carefully than his gifts. Children leaned around chairs to see the Korean visitor kneeling on patterned tile. Nari left the children's row and knelt beside him. She copied his bow badly, forehead almost touching his shoulder. Laughter moved through the compound, breaking the formality without breaking its meaning. Ngozi finally stepped forward and placed one hand on Min-jae's head, not crowning him, but accepting responsibility shared. The traditional marriage unfolded through action. Families exchanged gifts. Kola nut passed from hand to hand. Amara changed into coral beads and deep blue fabric, embroidered with silver cranes. She carried a cup of palm wine through the gathered relatives, searching among the men as custom required. Min-jae stood without moving, even when cousins tried to distract her by pointing elsewhere. Amara found him. She knelt and offered the cup. He accepted it with both hands, honoring her culture through the instinct of his own. He drank, returned the cup, and touched his forehead to hers. The compound erupted around them, but the bond was quiet. It had taken 5 years, 2 continents, a fallen empire, and a child who refused to remain a secret. Months later, the Korean ceremony took place in the estate garden. There were no black convoys at the gate. Guests arrived in ordinary cars and left their shoes beside the hall. Amara wore ivory hanbok beneath a red Nigerian beaded cape. Min-jae wore dark traditional robes lined with the same blue fabric from Enugu. Jun-seok and Ngozi sat side by side, correcting different parts of the ceremony with equally disapproving glances. During pieback, Amara and Min-jae bowed to both families. Dates and chestnuts flew into the silk cloth they held between them, symbols of children and continuity from a tradition that had once treated bloodline as ownership. Nari ran forward and dropped the repaired wooden tiger into the cloth as well. The red beans rattled inside it. Jun-seok smiled for the first time in any family photograph. Aisha stood beside him with one hand resting lightly at his back. Sun-hee cried without hiding her face. Dae-hyun, now head of a licensed security firm subject to actual audits, carried 3 lunchboxes because Nari had assigned him the task. After the guests left, rain began. It fell softly over the black gates and turned the stone paths silver, just as it had on the night Amara first arrived. The estate no longer watched the city like a fortress. The lower garden gate stood open toward a new daycare built for the children of workers from the nearby district. Music drifted from its windows, a Korean melody carried by the warm pulse of an Igbo ogen rhythm. Nari ran ahead in her yellow slippers, now too small and worn thin at the heels. One slipped from her foot beside the pond. Min-jae dropped to his knees. For an instant, the old image returned. The armed room, the red alarms, a ruthless man lowering himself between a child and every threat in his world. This time there were no guns. He fitted the yellow slipper back onto Nari's foot and tied a new green ribbon around it. Amara stood above them beneath one umbrella, coral beads warm against her wrist. Nari placed one hand on her father's bowed head and the other inside her mother's palm. The repaired tiger sounded softly from her pocket as the rain came down. Then Min-jae rose, not as a boss, not as an heir, but as the man their daughter had recognized before he had learned how to recognize himself, and the 3 of them walked through the open gate together.